I thought our labyrinth was supposed to be a fun, challenging tourist attraction. But the second I stopped paying attention, Veldora and Ramiris secretly turned our floor bosses into a Demon Lord-class death trap. Welcome to the birth of the 10 dungeon marvels. Before we see exactly how badly the Crusaders got crushed, please leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe to support the channel. It really helps keep this project going. Now, about that interrogation, after sending Gadora back toward the Empire, I had another interrogation to handle. Not Shinji and his friends, Ramiris. She had already let a few suspicious things slip, and if Ramiris was bold enough to prank me, there was no way those were the only secrets she was sitting on. The moment I turned my attention to her, she started fidgeting.
Huh? No way. I am not hiding anything.
That answer was too obvious to even pretend with. Ramiris had guilt written all over her. So I chose the fastest possible method and threatened to cut off her cake supply for the rest of her life. She folded immediately.
What do you want to know, Captain?
Captain, huh? I decided to let that one pass. Adalman has gotten ridiculously stronger since I last checked on him, I said. Fine, I can accept that much. But what about Alberto? I did not expect him to handle Shinji's party almost by himself. And nobody told me about a death dragon. You have not been secretly remodeling other floors too, have you? Alberto was not just a strong monster anymore. As a death paladin, he had the physical power of a special A threat, and he had the technique to use that body properly. Even before this, as a death knight, he could keep up with Hakuro. If he had grown again, I did not want to imagine how far. And that death dragon was its own problem. I could understand Adalman getting stronger after absorbing magicules in the labyrinth. I could understand Alberto improving under him. But when the dungeon casually started producing whole new threats I had never even heard about, the person in charge needed to know. I was that person, supposedly. Ramiris tried to explain it as if it were nothing.
Well, Alberto was training that kid Arnaud, I think. So they went back into the deeper floors to test themselves.
Stop. I had to cut her off right there. Alberto was teaching Arnaud? Arnaud was a squad leader among the Crusaders. He was one of Hinata's top paladins. The idea that he was the student in that relationship was already enough to make my head hurt. Ramiris rushed to fill in the missing pieces. After Hinata got angry with Arnaud and the others, they apparently licked their wounds and challenged the dungeon again. At the time, the Demon Colossus was still incomplete, so they managed to pass floor 70. That much I could follow. If the Demon Colossus was still under construction, the route past floor 60 and floor 70 would not have looked the way it did now. Arnaud's party were not weak either. They were trained paladins, and Arnaud himself was one of the 10 great saints. If they entered with proper preparation, making progress was not strange. And then, I asked,
And then they lost again!
Ramiris sounded far too proud of that. Veldora, naturally, was even worse. He broke into a delighted boom of laughter and looked like this was his favorite entertainment in the world. Raphael quietly informed me that a battle record was available. Nice. I would absolutely be watching that later. For the moment, though, I needed Ramiris to keep talking. I asked, how far did Arnaud's group make it this time? My guess was the dragon rooms between floors 96 and 99. Those had enough environmental tricks to make life miserable for human adventurers. But Veldora interrupted before Ramiris could answer.
They were annihilated by the next ball.
He sounded far too pleased with himself.
Watching them flee in tears was quite the spectacle.
Petty. Extremely petty. But the next boss? I asked. Was the floor 80 boss really that strong? I had named Zegion as the guardian of floor 80. Veldora had mentioned training him, but I still had no idea what that meant. Zegion was an insect monster. What exactly did Veldora-style training look like when the student was a bug? Arnaud was not someone I could dismiss. He was good enough that in rough terms I would have compared him to Clayman in the old Demon Lord class before Awakening became a factor. Of course, thinking about it more seriously, even the current Adalman or Alberto might beat that level without much trouble. The dungeon had advanced so far that my own scale for measuring it was already outdated. I had let Veldora do what he wanted because he looked so happy about it. In hindsight, that may have been a mistake. Zegion had used my own cells to heal his injuries and reinforce his shell with Maggie Steel. He was fast, mobile, and could call on his family, so the original idea was simple. After all those slow, heavy golems, challengers would face a quick insectoid boss who threw off their rhythm. That was the plan I knew about. The plan everyone else had apparently been improving in secret was something very different. Veldora declared it with full confidence.
My apprentice Zegion has completed his transformation. With the skills he inherited from me, he has become a warrior without equal.
I stared at him. Before I could even begin unpacking that, he added the important part. Zegion had not been the one to defeat Arnaud's party. They had been stopped on floor 79 by Apito. Now the situation made sense, which somehow made it worse. Apito, the Queen Wasp boss of floor 79, had crushed the Paladins before they could even reach Zegion. Her hyperspeed and venom were already dangerous, and with her swarm supporting her, even Arnaud's polished swordsmanship could not keep up. The story ended with the whole party being stung over and over until they ran screaming. The more I pictured it, the worse it got. Arnaud's group had probably entered expecting one final test before floor 80. Instead, they ran into an evolved Queen Wasp who moved too quickly to track, struck with lethal precision, and could flood the battlefield with her hive mates. It was not just raw power. The entire fight was designed to ruin a disciplined human party's rhythm. At that point, I could not hold it in anymore. I snapped. "Tell me this stuff. I have a job to do, you know?" Ramiris tried to shift blame onto Veldora. Veldora tried to act betrayed. Ramiris immediately accused him of being just as involved. He had no defense, because of course he had no defense. If Veldora found something entertaining, he was going to participate. Watching the two of them accuse each other was almost impressive. Ramiris insisted it was not only her fault because Veldora had been training the insects too. Veldora called her a traitor for saying so, but his reaction only proved she had hit the mark. Neither one of them had considered that maybe they should report this to me before the dungeon's bosses turned into Calamity-class attractions. I felt a little betrayed myself. Everyone had been playing with the dungeon behind my back while I was busy doing actual work. Still, the word transformation bothered me. "Veldora," I said, "when you say you train Zegion, what exactly do you mean?" "He is a bug, right?" I thought. "You do not mean he became humanoid or something, right?" Unfortunately, that was exactly what he meant. Veldora admitted he had noticed my confusion and stayed quiet because watching me slowly realize it was fun. What had I done to deserve this? I had Raphael pull images from the dungeon records. There Zegion was, humanoid, slender, carved into a sharp warrior shape and giving off an overwhelming pressure. The resemblance to Razul, the insectoid warrior Xion had fought in Lubelius, was obvious. That alone told me how dangerous he had become. The original idea for Zegion had been strange but manageable. He was a powerful insectoid guardian, reinforced with my cells and magisteel, placed after the golem-heavy floors to surprise challengers with speed and mobility. Trainee had approved the setup, and at the time I had seen no reason to interfere. The creature on the record was no longer just that. He had a humanoid frame now, meaning he could use martial techniques properly. His armor-like shell looked tougher than ever, and the way he stood made the air around him feel sharp even through a recorded image. Veldora's nonsense had somehow become real training. His body was not the only change. Becoming humanoid gave him a wider range of techniques to learn, and Veldora's training had somehow taken root. Apito had evolved too. She now had a refined humanoid form with a feminine silhouette, and her movements were polished enough that I instantly remembered Hinata coaching her. I had thought that was casual mock combat. Apparently it had been real training. Between Hinata's instruction and practice with Zegion, Apito's technical skill had become terrifying. That explained why Arnaud's party had been stopped before floor 80. Apito was not relying only on venom and speed anymore. She had proper footwork, proper timing, and the kind of clean movement Hinata would drill into someone. Add Zegion as a training partner, and her evolution was almost inevitable. Arnaud's defeat was proof enough. After that, Arnaud and the Paladins decided to go back to the beginning and rebuild themselves from the ground up. That was how they ran into Floor 60's new problem. Alberto, Death Paladin and servant of Adelman the Immortal King. Alberto had been one of the strongest Paladin warriors of his era. Now he had old human technique, monster-grade physical stats, an undead body that never tired, regeneration that made normal damage feel pointless, and Adelman's holy evil inversion backing him up. Unless you struck the right elemental weakness, fighting him was like trying to argue with a wall. Even cutting him apart was not a solution. He could lose a limb and keep fighting, or simply regenerate and continue. That alone would break most opponents. Against someone like Arnaud, who was used to reading a living enemy's stamina, pain, and limits, Alberto's undead body completely changed the rules. The first time Alberto beat them, he apparently taunted them with a pun about paladins becoming paladons. It was awful. It also enraged Arnaud enough that he even tried Ether Break and it still did not work. I almost respected how terrible the joke was. Almost. The important part was that the insult pushed Arnaud to fight seriously, and even then he could not break through. The gap was not about effort. It was about matchup, evolution, and a labyrinth environment that kept feeding our monsters exactly what they needed to grow. Honestly, I could not blame Arnaud for losing. Adelman's whole group had absorbed so many magicules in the labyrinth that they had evolved into top-class monsters, and Arnaud had challenged them at exactly the wrong time. But from another angle, this was an incredible training opportunity. How often did a paladin get to cross swords with a legendary knight from centuries ago? So Arnaud's Crusaders were now rotating through the dungeon under Alberto's guidance. Floor 60 had become a death trap while I was not paying attention, but a useful one. That raised the obvious question. I asked, what about the other floors? Adelman, Alberto, Zegion, and Apito could not be the only ones who had transformed down there. And sure enough, the dungeon now had a group of ultimate guardians who called themselves the 10 Dungeon Marvels. Adelman was included, so was Alberto. Apito, now known as the Insect Queen, had joined them. Zegion, the Insect Kaiser, stood above her. Kumara was there as well, and she had apparently gained the ability to take on an adult form by incorporating the magical beasts from her 9 tails into herself. Then Ramiris made a grand announcement and laid out the full roster. First came the 4 Dragon Lords. Ramiris had raised them carefully because of her promise to Melim, and constant exposure to Veldora's magicules had pushed them into evolution. That gave us a Fire Dragon Lord, a Frost Dragon Lord, a Wind Dragon Lord, and an Earth Dragon Lord in the deep floors. The full Dungeon Marvel list was now the Fire Dragon Lord, the Frost Dragon Lord, the Wind Dragon Lord, the Earth Dragon Lord, 9-Head Kumara, Insect Kaiser Zegion, Insect Queen Apito, Immortal King Adelman, Death Paladin Alberto, and Beretta. Put another way, the bottom of the labyrinth had become absurd. The 4 Dragon Lords guarded the deepest elemental sections. Kumara held floor 90, Zegion guarded floor 80, Apito ruled floor 79. Adelman controlled floor 70 with Alberto as his advance guard. Then Beretta, who kept the whole operation functioning, had been pulled into the roster as the final member. That was the part I had to keep straight. These were not just strong monsters standing around in impressive poses. Each one now represented a specific checkpoint in the dungeon's defensive structure. The Dragon Lords protected the deepest approach to Veldora. Kumara guarded the last stretch before them. Zegion and Apito formed a brutal insect tandem around floor 80, and Adelman's group turned floor 70 into a wholly undead nightmare zone. Beretta's inclusion showed that management itself had become part of the labyrinth's strength. Bovix and Equix, our floor 50 guardians, were a bonus. They were important, but not members of the 10 Dungeon Marvels in this reveal. That distinction mattered. Bovix and Equix were strong, and they had an important role on floor 50. But Ramiris was presenting the Marvels as something more formal. The highest class of Dungeon Guardians. The kind of lineup you could not casually throw at ordinary challengers without destroying the whole point of a public labyrinth. Beretta, meanwhile, looked like a manager who had just been promoted into more unpaid responsibility. They politely suggested that perhaps this grand honor could be awarded to someone else, and their eyes drifted toward Trainee and Cheris. Trainee smiled beautifully and explained that caring for Lady Ramiris was already an extremely important duty. Cheris, who had become Veldora's confidant, also claimed that tending to Veldora used all of his attention. Neither of them wanted the extra work. I understood that feeling so well it hurt. I told Beretta, "Sounds like you have it rough." Beretta looked genuinely moved that I sympathized. In that moment, I felt a powerful bond between overworked managers. Once the roster was clear, I needed to know the chain of command. The Labyrinth was part hobby, part business, and part national defense system. It ran on Ramiris' ability and Veldora's energy, so Ramiris was the general manager. But the Guardians themselves had their own loyalties. This was not just paperwork. If the Empire attacked, unclear authority could get people killed. If Ramiris gave one order, I gave another, and a Guardian hesitated over who they truly served, the Labyrinth's strength would become a liability. So I needed to understand the actual relationships, not just the titles. Ramiris had already interviewed everyone and adjusted their positions. Beretta remained under Ramiris. The 4 Dragon Lords were also under Ramiris, complete with proper contracts now that they were sentient enough to agree to them. Kumara, on the other hand, had become close to the children and was apparently overflowing with gratitude toward me. She had even publicly declared herself my pet, leaving Ranga completely upstaged. Zegion and Apito also viewed me as their lord. Adelman worshipped me as a god, which meant Alberto followed me through him. The Kumara part was especially awkward. I was happy she felt attached, but declaring herself my pet in public was bound to make Ranga sulk. As for Adelman, there was no correcting him anymore. Once someone decides you are a divine being, normal conversation stops working. So Kumara, Zegion, Apito, Adelman, and Alberto were effectively mine. I assumed Bovix and Equix would belong under Ramiris, since they were hired as Floor 50 Guardians, but they insisted on serving me too. At first I thought they had simply judged Ramiris by appearances, since their species respected strength so openly. Ramiris corrected me. I had named them. To them, that was worth more than any salary. That made me happier than I expected. I made a note to say something kind to them next time. All of this meant that while I had been watching Shinji's party and worrying about the Empire, the Labyrinth had quietly turned into something almost absurd. I was glad the Guardians were stronger, of course. Still, all these surprise evolutions made me anxious. That was probably my timid side talking, but I could not ignore it. With the 10 dungeon marvels in place, an Imperial assault inside the Labyrinth no longer looked frightening. The problem was the other side of that success. If every normal challenger got crushed before they could enjoy the dungeon, what had we built it for? The Labyrinth was supposed to be a business too. Adventurers came in, tested themselves, paid for the experience, and spread stories about Tempest. If the first rumor everyone heard was that Demon Lord-class monsters were waiting on multiple floors, we might scare away the very customers we wanted. I told the Guardians to go a little easy on the general public. Floor 100 could remain unreachable. Veldora alone could guarantee that. But I wanted ordinary adventurers to have at least some chance of reaching the deeper areas. We had spent a lot of effort building this place. I wanted people to actually see it. That was a peacetime problem, though. For now, I inspected the Guardians one by one and confirmed the results with my own eyes. They were beyond anything I had imagined. If the Empire tried to invade us through this labyrinth, I could not see how we would lose. A few days later, I finally tested the completed forest monitoring system. We were in the Strategic Military Control Battle Command Center, a name Veldora and the others had helped me devise when everyone was letting their imaginations run too freely. I regretted the length now. Benimaru simply called it the Control Center, which was probably for the best. The Control Center was built beside Veldora's private chamber on floor 100. It also connected to our normal strategy room, so if we ever had to quarantine the surface city inside the labyrinth, this room could function as Tempest's wartime headquarters. I hoped we would never need it for that. Still, having the option mattered. If the Empire surrounded the city, the labyrinth could shelter our people, preserve our command structure, and let us keep watching the outside world. It was strange to think that a place we had built as entertainment had become one of our most reliable defensive assets. The monitoring system itself worked beautifully. Large screens, like the ones we used during the battle tournament, displayed different views. The Forest of Jura, trade roads toward the Dwarven Kingdom, key border areas, sea routes in Farminus, and even the peaks of the Kanat Mountains appeared in clear detail. The images were not blurry impressions either. We could see enough detail to make military decisions from a warm room deep underground. Roads, mountain lines, coastline routes, border positions, and movement patterns all appeared with a clarity that made the whole thing feel less like magic and more like looking through a window. The principle was simple in theory and ridiculous in practice. It used the same basic idea as Megiddo, my physical magic. A large lens-shaped body of water was suspended high in the stratosphere, where it could subtly reshape itself and magnify the image of a chosen target point. That reflected image could then be transmitted like video. Moss helped me refine the method using tiny replications of my own body as magic invokers. They were scattered around our territory, linked to me through dominate space and synchronized so perfectly that the system could treat distant points as if they were connected. The replications were extremely small and had no self-consciousness, so they barely consumed energy unless I focused on them. That last part was important. If each replication had a will of its own, the cost and risk would be absurd. Instead, they were closer to remote magical terminals. They waited until I used them, then served as points through which the system could invoke and align the necessary magic. Deploying them to the right places was not easy, but Moss and their teams handled that work. It was the kind of invisible labor that made the finished product look effortless. From my seat in the control center, I could simply select a viewpoint and see the result. But behind that convenience were Moss, Soe, and their people hauling tiny pieces of me into position across an enormous territory. Raphael processed the images, cleaned them up, and gave us high-resolution output on the screens. The whole thing was low cost, wide range, and far too useful. I named the physical magic Argos, the Eye of God. Everyone was excited by the results. Diablo was especially enthusiastic, though that was a topic I preferred not to dwell on. Then I realized Argos had another use. If I could see a location on the control center screens, I could aim Megiddo through that image. That changed Argos from surveillance into target acquisition. Watching the enemy was already valuable. Being able to strike through the same image meant the enemy might never know where the attack came from. No visible caster, no nearby magic circle, just light focused from above. I tested it by firing a tiny shot near Gopta's feet while he was training in the town square. He jumped so hard I thought he might leave the ground permanently. The face he made was unforgettable. I did scold him afterward for letting his guard down. Privately, I knew he was not really at fault. There was no reasonable way for him to expect a surprise Megiddo shot from a monitoring screen. Raphael had improved Megiddo too. The Great Sage had optimized it once already, but Raphael apparently found room for more. Now I could maintain multiple lens satellites at once, and paired with Argos, the spell could even function at night. It was weaker in darkness, but by reflecting light between satellites, we could still collect images and launch attacks. During the day, with light and heat gathered efficiently, the system could operate even more aggressively. A high-level spirit maintained the lenses as long as I supplied magicules, and Raphael handled all the impossible calculations. It was impressive. It was also a little frightening. At this rate, I could wipe out a human army without lifting a finger. I could not help wondering whether we had spent our effort on something dangerously effective. After the experiment succeeded, I returned to my office. Not long after, Shuna came to tell me I had visitors. I deal with a lot of guests. I may not look like it, but receiving people is a major part of my job. There is also magic development, product planning, personnel assignments, Labyrinth administration, Molly's requests, and a dozen other things. Work needs some play in it, sure, but visitors still matter. In Shinji's case, this was more delicate than a normal appointment. He and his friends had come from the Empire as infiltrators, but their situation had changed completely. Treating them like prisoners would only make them defensive. Treating them like citizens too quickly would ignore the reality that they still had ties to the other side. Shuna guided me to the reception room where Shinji, Mark, and Jen were waiting nervously. They had officially chosen Asylum in Tempest. Over the past few days, I had been collecting information from them. It was voluntary, not an interrogation. They were interviewed separately, and I made sure they could use their free time however they wanted. I wanted information, of course. With the Empire moving, every scrap of context could matter. But I also wanted them to understand that Tempest was not the kind of place that squeezed people dry and threw them away. If they chose to stay, I needed that choice to mean something. Now they had come to tell me what they wanted to do next. I asked them, "Have you decided?" The three of them had a few options. They could keep adventuring, work under some organization in Tempest, or try to live more independently. Adventuring would make them popular and could earn decent money. But after seeing the Labyrinth's true difficulty, they had to understand their limit. The Demon Colossus waited on floor 60, and even if they somehow passed that, Adelman and his group were only 10 floors deeper. It was a dead end. Good pay or not, spending the rest of their lives running into that wall sounded miserable. And it was not as if they could simply power through by stubbornness. The Labyrinth rewarded growth, but it also punished people who misjudged themselves. Shinji's group had already seen enough to know that beyond a certain point, the dungeon stopped being a workplace and became a wall. Working in Tempest would be more stable, but war with the Empire was approaching. I had no intention of forcing them into battle, but I also could not promise they would never be involved. So I waited for their answer. Shinji spoke carefully. After discussing it, the three of us would like to work here in Tempest. We heard that Lord Gadora would be serving you, Sir Rimuru. We hope you will allow us to live and work here as well. Mark and Zen nodded beside him. They looked nervous, but they had clearly decided together. Gadora serving me gave them a reason to trust this place, and none of them wanted to end up fighting acquaintances from the Empire if they could avoid it. In that case, I told them, welcome home. They thanked me each in their own way, and Tempest's population increased by 3. It sounded simple when I said it, but for them it had to be a major decision. They were not just changing jobs, they were choosing a place to belong, knowing that the country they came from might soon be our enemy. That was why I wanted the words to be plain. Tempest would not pretend their past had vanished, but if they were choosing to live here, I wanted them to hear a welcome instead of a warning. The next issue was work. I am planning to have Old Man Gadora manage floor 60, I explained. He will research the Demon Colossus there, and in the future I may have him possess it. Gadora's hunger for knowledge was not ordinary. The moment he saw the Demon Colossus, he had looked ready to dance from excitement. He was with Adelman for now, but later, making him the floor 60 guardian might be perfect. Then I asked Shinji's group the important question. You do not want to join the war, right? Shinji hesitated, then admitted that they knew people on the Imperial side. If possible, they wanted to avoid that conflict. That was a reasonable answer. If someone told me to fight people I had worked with, studied with, or lived beside, I would hesitate too. I was not going to demand that kind of loyalty from them on day one. That made the decision easy. Instead of placing them in the government, I would give them research work in the Labyrinth, and the person who needed capable assistance most was Ramiris. We headed through the dungeon to her laboratory. Ramiris, I said, can you find work for these 3 in your lab? She immediately recognized them as the kids from before. Ramiris had been searching for personal assistants for a while. The problem was finding anyone suitable. Researchers from other nations were too risky to hand over to her, and less intelligent monsters could not keep up with her wildly ambitious ideas. Dino existed, sure, but that was not enough to put me at ease. Ramiris's ideas were brilliant, but they came out in wild leaps. Someone working under her needed enough knowledge to understand the concept, enough patience to translate it into work, and enough flexibility not to panic when the fairy in charge suddenly decided to chase a completely different possibility. Shinji, Mark, and Zhen were educated otherworlders. They had technical knowledge, flexible thinking, and enough survival instinct to understand when a situation was dangerous. They were exactly the kind of people Ramiris needed. Ramiris flitted forward and introduced herself. Shinji froze, not quite sure how to react. Mark, however, lit up. Mark practically sparkled. A real fairy. Maybe it was his first time seeing one. I had no idea how long he had lived in this world, but anyone that excited by a fairy had to have a pretty pure heart. Ramiris explained that she needed capable assistants and would pay them. She also cheerfully added that I had called fully educated otherworlders a time-saving solution. She did not need to say that part out loud. Still, it was true. Their skills were useful, and I hoped they would accept. Mark was already halfway convinced by the fact that Ramiris existed. Zhen listened more quietly. but I could see the appeal on his face. Research in a protected labyrinth was about as far from battlefield chaos as he could reasonably hope for. Shinji, meanwhile, kept watching the others and measuring the offer carefully. Zhen was the first to decide. Research sounded much more peaceful to him. That seemed to settle Shinji's doubts. In that case, Shinji said, by all means. Ramiris immediately puffed herself up in midair, sticking out a chest that did not really exist, and switching into superior boss mode as if the earlier awkwardness had never happened. She declared that they had potential, that they had passed, and that they would have to obey all her orders. The three of them stared in confusion while she rushed into the employment terms. 3 gold coins per month, which made 36 per year with bonuses on top. I would not rely too heavily on those bonuses since Ramiris tended to pay based on her mood. That was uncomfortably similar to me, actually. For most people, that was a good salary. The bonus part was the dangerous promise. Ramiris sounded confident, but I knew exactly how this would go. If she was excited, she would pay generously. If she forgot, someone else would have to remind her. Most likely that someone would be me. Room and board were included too. I was sure she expected them to use my dining hall, but I did not mind. Considering their situation, it was not a bad offer at all. They would have a roof, meals, steady work, and a role that used their knowledge without forcing them onto the battlefield. It also kept their skills inside a section of the labyrinth where Ramiris, Veldora, and I could all keep an eye on things. Just like that, Shinji's group had a place in Tempest and work in Ramiris' lab. A few more days passed. The three of them adapted quickly and started serving as Ramiris' right hands. That part looked stable. Gadora, however, was beginning to worry me. I had heard nothing from him since he left for the Empire. He was stubborn, and I knew he could take care of himself, but the silence still bothered me. I wished he would at least send word. He had gone back for a reason, and I trusted his judgment enough to let him go. Even so, silence before a war has a way of making every possibility feel worse. Maybe he was lying low. Maybe he had found something important. Maybe he had run into trouble. Without contact, all I could do was guess. That thought lingered while I held a briefing with Benimaru in the control center. Argos video filled the large monitor. Every viewpoint was clear. I still wanted intelligence from deeper inside the Empire, but for now, the border feeds were enough. Large groups of soldiers had gathered there, watching the frontier carefully. Tension stayed high. The Empire had not crossed the line yet, but their presence was too deliberate to dismiss. Soldiers do not gather in numbers just to enjoy the scenery. Argos let us watch them without provoking them, which made it perfect for this stage of the conflict. No moves today, it looks like, I said. Benimaru agreed, then looked over the screens with open appreciation. Since we were alone, his tone was more casual than usual. I preferred him that way, but whenever other people were around, he went back to being formal and stiff. Around Zoe and Diablo, though, he relaxed. The three of us had a partners in crime feeling, and sometimes we even went drinking together in Anglecia. Benimaru started to say how useful the magic was, and that was all Diablo needed. That was the danger of praising anything in front of Diablo. If he could connect it to me, he would. If he could connect it to my brilliance, he would do that too. And if nobody stopped him, he would keep going until the room itself got tired. Diablo launched into a lavish speech about the innovation behind my idea, the enormous effects achieved at low cost, the elegance of the calculations, and the artistry of the entire system. I cut him off before he could build any more momentum. Enough. Once you start bragging, you never stop. Do it when I am not around. This always happened if I let my guard down. Diablo would start praising me until I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. Argos was impressive, sure, but Raphael was doing most of the hard work. Taking that praise as my own felt awkward. Benimaru backed me up and told Diablo to restrain himself. Diablo looked genuinely offended that anyone would call his praise troublesome, so I made it clear. I said, Benimaru is right. It is always Rimuru this, Rimuru that with you. Tone it down. Diablo collapsed to the floor as if I had struck him directly in the soul. Benimaru watched him fall with the tired expression of someone who had seen this exact sort of thing too many times already. I appreciated the restraint. A public version of Benimaru would probably have tried to smooth things over politely. Private Benimaru simply let Diablo suffer the consequences of being Diablo. At first, learning that Diablo was a primal demon had made me wonder what I had gotten myself into. But if I was honest, he had been strange from the beginning. Even Guy had trouble dealing with him. The more seriously I took Diablo's weirdness, the more foolish I looked. That realization made him easier to handle. Unfortunately, Diablo was still Diablo. From the floor, he murmured that I had dealt such beautiful emotional damage to him. I told him, I am telling you to stop that. Going a little hard on him was the only way to keep him balanced. Our ridiculous little moment ended when Ramiris contacted me. Ramiris's voice cut in. Someone had teleported directly into the labyrinth. Based on the signature, she thought it was the old man I had befriended, Gadora. I told her I was heading to floor 70. The moment I stood, Benimaru and Diablo both realized something had happened. I appreciated that. I gave them the short version. Gadora is back, but something sounds wrong. I am going to check on him. Benimaru straightened at once.
Then I will stay on alert here.
Diablo stepped in beside me.
I will escort you, Sir Rimuru.
Thanks. At times like this, Diablo really was dependable. If only he acted that way all the time. There was no point dwelling on it. I left Benimaru watching the control center feeds, and with Diablo at my side, I headed toward Gadora's chamber.
Route confirmed. The next episode and full playlist are ready.
Then don't stop here. Keep watching in story order and subscribe before the next part drops.